So for the first sessions, as I promised, we talk about the private IoT networks. And it's a pleasure to welcome Steffen Sorrell, the Chief of Research at Kaleidointelligence. Hello, Steffen.
Hi, Dario. Good to be here. How are you?
It's lovely to have you here, and Kaleidointelligence that have been so busy covering so much of the stuff we're talking about today. Steffen, I know you have a fantastic group of people out there. I'm not going to take any more of your time. I'd just like to thank you, and through you, all of the different people that have accepted to come and talk to us today. So here it is. The floor is all yours. Bye-bye.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, Dario. Welcome, everyone. I hope you can see my slides. So today we're going to talk about opportunities for enterprise private networks. Just to introduce myself, my name is Steffen Sorrell. I'm a Chief of Research here at Kaleidointelligence. We're a specialist research firm investigating cellular roaming, mobile IoT, among which we have reports covering things like eSIM, private networks, IoT MVNOs, and more. But today's focus is on private networks. So just to move to the agenda today. So what will happen is I'll give a quick overview of some of the latest findings from our reports on mobile private networks that came out last week. Following on from that, we will have a panel discussion with some esteemed guests and experts in the space today. And with some time left over, hopefully, you, the audience, will have some questions, which we can then address in the final 10 minutes or so of the session. So with that in mind, I do encourage you to add any questions that you have into the Q&A box throughout the presentation or throughout the panel, and hopefully we'll be able to get to as many of those as possible by the end of the session. So I'm just going to introduce today's panel. So you've heard from me, but first of all, we have Sylwia Kechiche. I do apologize if I've mispronounced your name, but she is a principal analyst for IoT and enterprise at GSMA. So welcome, Sylwia. Next up, we have Fawad Noory. He is the Vice President, Product Management for Connectivity Enablement as a Service at Core Wireless, also for private networks and 5G. So welcome, Fawad. And yeah, next up, we have Christian Wagner. He is the CEO at Bayfu. And his company is involved in systems integration and private networks in Germany. Welcome, Christian. And last but not least, we have
everybody.
Last but not least, we have Cédric Jarkovsky, Head of IoT Product Management at Transatel. I see that your microphones have just come online. I do apologize. I thought there was a bit of lag. Perhaps, Sylwia, you want to open quickly with your involvement with GSMA as well as in private networks.
Hi, thanks, Steffen. I'm Sylwia Kechiche, Principal Analyst at GSMA Intelligence. So GSMA Intelligence with the research and consulting arm of the GSMA. And one of the areas that we look at is obviously private networks, how they fit within the whole 5G IoT landscape. And within GSMA, so the bigger picture, we also have 5G IoT post-1 manufacturing working group, where we bring together operators, vendors, and actual enterprises just to try to figure out what 5G can do and how it can help them.
Thanks, Sylwia. Fawad, do we have you online?
Yeah, hi Everyone. Yes, I'm part of the Core Wireless team looking at private networks and private 4G and 5G. Its focus is to actually look at the gaps and understand what Core Wireless can offer in this space. We're looking to, as Core Wireless has been the trusted partner in the IoT space for many years, we're looking into private networks and support enterprises both locally, globally, in adoption of the journey towards private 5G.
Thanks, Fawad. Christian, do we have you here?
Hello. Yes, my name is Christian Wagner from Germany, based in Germany with Bayfu, a consulting company. We are mainly active in different branches like MNOs, like the city carrier, as well as the industry partner, which are very interested in having mobile private networks. And as you know, in Germany, it's a very hot topic. And hopefully we can clarify some topics today.
Great. Thank you, Christian. Quickly over to you, Cédric.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Cédric, I'm part of Transatel, and we provide actually a global cellular connectivity solution for the IoT. And we are mainly present in some key sectors like automotive, aerospace, manufacturing, energy. And as I'm sure we'll discuss today, those are some of the key sectors that are very interested into private 5G.
Great, thanks, Cédric. So yeah, we've got a great panel coming up, so it should be some really interesting discussion ahead. But let's move quickly on to some introduction around private networks. So I thought I'd just give a brief overview of really what private networks are. For some of those in the audience who perhaps are not familiar, I mean, really, we all use private networks every day, Wi-Fi, Ethernet at work. But really what we're discussing today is private networks for enterprises. And these are really not a new concept. So technologies such as digital mobile radio, Tetra, even Wi-Fi, as well as industrial Ethernet, have all been used historically to enable specific applications across a number of different verticals, such as voice services, communications, across emergency services, transport. Military has a history of using private networks along with mining, utilities, and even oil and gas. So the interest among several verticals in private networks has always been there. But really, when we look at these technologies that you see in the top right-hand corner, they often come with compromises that perhaps mean that the industry has not expanded as far as it could have done. So what we have today is a situation where it's possible to deploy dedicated private networks using LTE or 5G technologies, so based on 3GPP standards, which offer comparable performance to technologies such as Ethernet or even better performance than Wi-Fi, perhaps, but have fewer of the compromises that are involved with these legacy technologies. So when we look at bandwidth, for example, both LTE and 5G can support very high bandwidth use cases, particularly 5G. So that enables new private network applications such as video. They are also, because of the mainly because they are mainly used in licensed frequency ranges, they're no longer subject to the interference that you might have with a congested Wi-Fi network, for example. So they're highly reliable. Additionally, because of their features, their capabilities, the performance of these networks can be comparable to traditional wired networks in terms of latency, for example. But because these are wireless technologies, you get much better flexibility in terms of the deployment itself, and that in turn can help with the cost of deploying these private networks. Additionally, there are security benefits. I mean, 3GPP technologies are traditionally highly secure. They use SIM authentication, in contrast to Wi-Fi that has user authentications. So you're looking at a highly secure solution for private networks, which, as I'm sure we'll see later, is very important for enterprises looking to enter the space. And indeed, across the broader IoT, security is always something that comes up as a very critical aspect of deployment. And finally, there is the overall cost aspect. I mentioned a little bit about cost versus wired networks just now, but indeed, when you look at even Wi-Fi, which many enterprises are familiar with, when you look at the coverage of Wi-Fi versus LTE or 5G, you get improved performance. So you need fewer base stations to cover the same area in terms of square meterage versus Wi-Fi. So you can reveal cost improvements over certain technologies there. So really, just to emphasize the point, these are LTE and 5G private networks offer a highly reliable, high-performance system without the compromises that we've seen in legacy technologies. So what are the drivers today? Why is everyone talking about enterprise mobile private networks? Well, I suppose the biggest one today has been the emergence of the availability of dedicated spectrum for general enterprise use. Historically, there may have been set-aside spectrum issued by regulators, but often this was for specific verticals and was perhaps sometimes underused. But today, many national regulatory authorities, the NRAs, are releasing dedicated spectrum for general enterprise use, which means that the market to access these licensed frequencies is much more open than it used to be, and it's generating a lot of interest. We'll have a look at that a bit more closely in a few slides' time. Another aspect is, of course, accelerated enterprise digitization efforts, particularly to support mission-critical activities. And this, in turn, has been further bolstered by the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's, you've got a double whammy, really, there of both digitization that's already been accelerating, but is now being compounded by the need to mitigate future risks. So by implementing things such as connected monitoring, automation, and so on, to avoid some of the pitfalls that perhaps many enterprises experienced during the several lockdowns or social distancing regulations that we've seen across the world. And finally, of course, there is a new emergence of new vertical interests across several areas. To name a few, manufacturing, Industry 4.0, and even areas such as healthcare and education off the back of COVID-19. These verticals have all been looking to deploy mobile private networks to support business activities. Okay, so how are mobile private networks deployed? So there's several different ways that they can be deployed and managed. It really depends on the type of organization getting involved in the private network deployment. Historically, what we've seen is most companies that have very high security requirements and also a significant capital backing have looked to fully isolated private networks with everything on premises, looking towards the highest security, and on some occasions even looking to manage the network themselves. Of course, this is a very complex endeavor. It requires in-depth knowledge of 3GPP technology, network design, and so on. So in many instances, they have also engaged with a partner to manage the network themselves. But typically, we've seen this across areas such as mining, utility, Industry 4.0, and public safety applications. There's also options to perhaps take a sort of a hybrid approach where you may have the data traveling within a fully isolated zone, but the control plane traffic being moved to some kind of cloud deployment. And that really makes it much easier, much faster to deploy a network in terms of the management aspect of it, because then, for example, an MNO or a connectivity service provider or so on can spin up instances to manage the private network. So this really is looking towards a mix of CapEx and OpEx to deploy the network. While there is, of course, another option where it's fully cloud-based, and these are mainly suitable for public IoT or consumer access applications, for example, events, where really there's a very limited deployment of on-premises hardware and so on, and offers really the fastest time to market, but on the other hand, really a lower perceived security level. So I talked briefly about how spectrum is one of the keys to opening up the market for private LTE and 5G. And as you can see on the chart here to the left, we have a map of all the current and potential future openings of spectrum across the world. As you can see, it's not exactly harmonized, but there is a lot of activity going on between 3.4 to 3.8 gigahertz, as well as in the millimeter wave bands, which will mainly be used for indoor applications where you can expect a high connection density or very low latency requirements, manufacturing, for example, where robotics and so on are used. So it's a lot of countries now looking to open up the market and enable dedicated spectrum for enterprises to get into the market. One of the, opening up the spectrum is one part of the story. The processes behind that are a totally different one. And we've seen several different approaches across the world. Often players will want to apply with the regulator, and then it's basically done on a first come, first serve basis. But we've seen some innovative models across the world, such as in the USA, who have opened up the so-called CBRS spectrum, which is a dynamically shared spectrum process. So you have both licensed as well as unlicensed spectrum users, where I believe over 200 applicants received licenses recently to deploy or use that spectrum that they have to sell services in the market. So there's a wide range of companies getting involved in that one. And the interesting thing about this side of, well, in the USA's deployment model is that there are mechanisms in place to ensure that frequency use is not interfering with nearby or competing networks, and the unlicensed users are dynamically allocated spectrum according to freely available frequencies. The UK has a similar model in place, called local shared access, where over 100 licenses have been issued. In addition to that, the Ofcom has a model in place where applicants can apply to Ofcom for spectrum in frequencies that are perceived as underused by MNOs. Now, this could be in any area of the country, but they apply through Ofcom. Ofcom consults with incumbent MNOs to see if there's a conflict, and then potentially a license could be issued. So it's a very interesting way of approaching the market. It's not currently based on the dynamic mechanism that the USA used, but nonetheless, very interesting approach indeed. Meanwhile, Germany has famously open the market for dedicated enterprise licenses for so-called campus networks. There's a heavy focus towards 5G frequencies there, and it's not really surprising to see that a lot of manufacturing deployments are now happening in Germany with the view to using these 5G frequencies. Japan, similarly, has interestingly adopted a local authority licensing mechanism, also with a 5G focus on the market. So there's some really interesting activity going on in the space right now. But there are still many challenges in the market today. And I think we're going to talk a little more over those in the panel, but some of the few that I've picked out here are, as I mentioned earlier, first of all, the spectrum harmonization. As we saw from the map, it's a bit of a scatter graph. So what does that mean? So in terms of chipsets and modules, who should these players support? At this stage, we're at a very early point in the market. So it's difficult to, in terms of device availability, as we see from the second bullet point there. And additionally, on the 5G side, we've got concerns over modem and radio access network availability for 5G deployments. And finally, on the device side, while there are devices that do support private LTE, private 5G frequencies, often these are not ruggedized, so are unsuitable for some enterprise private network applications. And in some cases, even the devices are locked to MNO bands, so cannot be used for where MNOs are not involved in the deployment. Finally, of course, I talked a little about the spectrum processes, but the variation across the world means that it's difficult for enterprises. Who controls the spectrum? Who are my partners? In some countries, spectrum can be got by the enterprise directly. In some cases, they're looking to a conduit. In some countries, they will need to engage with an MNO to perhaps lease an MNO's available spectrum. And finally, there is, of course, the complexity of the deployment itself. Should an enterprise go for a self-owned, self-managed solution? Should they look to third-party expertise for design, planning, management, and deployment? And what about roaming across the private and the public network? Is that needed? Is it a requirement? And how is that implemented? And then finally, of course, there is the issue of vertical expertise. I mean, IoT is invariably a custom initiative for enterprises, from the hardware all the way up to connectivity and the application. So partners need to have great vertical expertise to really address these enterprise requirements, which, as we've seen, I believe it was someone from Airbus who mentioned that even MNOs or larger carriers needed to be handheld for their own private network deployment. So we still have some way to go in that aspect. I mentioned there briefly, who are my partners? So who holds the keys for private networks? I mean, we've got a plethora of players in the market, ranging from MNOs, MVNOs. There's regulators controlling the spectrum. There's systems integrators to put all the pieces together. There's network solutions vendors. There's hardware players. And I think the point really to emphasize here is that we must move forward with a process of collaboration and partnerships to develop not only the expertise needed for enterprises, but also to develop the journey that enterprises need to take when entering the mobile private network space. I'm just going to close out my slides with a view of what we have for the market today. So this is enterprise private LTE and 5G CapEx through 2026. And when we talk about CapEx and OpEx, this is the sort of the hardware and the management costs involved in private networks. So we do see that market expanding to well over 7 billion by 2026. With a significant presence in markets such as East Asia, North America, as well as Europe and Central Asia. In terms of the verticals involved, I mentioned manufacturing. That is definitely a vertical that we see significant growth in across the next 5 years, in addition to other areas of Industry 4.0, as well as utilities and areas such as oil and gas. So I think I've been speaking for too long now, so let's move on to the panel discussion. So yep, there we go. Okay, so hello panelists. I'm just going to open up the discussion perhaps with really what's the business case for private network deployments? Should enterprises be looking at LTE or 5G? I think maybe Christian, I'll open that one to you.
Yeah. So it's not an easy answer. So what is the real business case? Because we see there are two ways to look on these private network topics. The one thing is I want to do some automation. I want to do some use cases which I cannot do with alternative wireless technologies like Wi-Fi or LTE or the public LTE or MNO network. And the other thing is I want to have a substitute of my alternative wireless network. So these are the two topics which are dealing today. For the business case for the first one is not a straightforward business case. It's more the business case that if you can do something better, if you can do in a production line, if you can produce a car 10 or 20 seconds faster, then you have an advantage, and then you have a business case. At the other hand, what we see and where today are really the serious use cases and really the serious deployments, we see there is a fact that they want to have an alternative to Wi-Fi. And they want to change the production line to Wi-Fi. Why is that? Because the number of access points they need for an indoor and outdoor area when they have a large campus, this is unbelievable. And they can do it with LTE or with 5G. They can do it more easily because they have more power on the radio sides. They can use less equipment, and this is something which is the first business case. The second business case, the use cases behind the drones and all this stuff which is coming up these years. This is something which is still in research topics, but it's not today that it is in the serious production area. So that's what I see today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Fawad, you've been involved in private networks with Infosys and now with Core. Is that something you mirror? Do you have some other views on that?
No, I think I echo what Christian mentioned. Means the part of coverage is something that the enterprise are looking to think about. But elements of, I want to add, coverage is one thing in areas where Wi-Fi has never been the element of communication. Like high electromagnetic interference and other areas in industrial spaces and manufacturing. So they are actually want to have that digitization where the data is being generated and they actually want to capture that data instantly rather than having, and COVID has taught us a lot of things and where the adoption has trickled so much. So they want, instead of being technicians working at the shop floor, to be more digitally controlling. The vision of going digital manufacturing is actually being realized by using such technologies. So I would echo the same what's happening, but there are different reasons also on the elements of the part of the decision on adopting. It comes on the number of use cases, and sometimes that does not come to a point where they can actually go to adopt, and they're just going to wait until they can understand further the complexity of 3GPP and the features and capabilities. But yeah.
Okay, interesting. In terms of the spectrum availability today, I mean, how do you see that impacting the market today? I mean, perhaps Christian, that's one for you.
Yeah, I think so. You mentioned it in your presentation that we are having a very unharmonized spectrum for the industry, and this is something which is hindering us, and this is something which is lower down the speed of putting the mobile networks into the market. This is one really a critical element is this disharmonization of the spectrum and the different countries. So especially we in Germany, in Europe, Europe is divided in small countries, and everyone, as you saw in your picture, has some other spectrums, and they have some other authorities and some other processes how to apply to the spectrum. This makes it complicated for multinational or European-wide companies, because they want to have a strategy. They want to have a strategy on an LTE or on 5G private network. They want to have a vendor RFQ. They want to select one vendor, one type of radio unit, one type of strategy. And this is something which is complex. In Germany, we are very lucky, to be honest. We have these 3.7 to 3.8 gigahertz, 100 megahertz, which is a lot. And you can apply for that. If you are the landlord, if you are the owner of a company, if you are the owner of a campus, you can apply for that, and you can use it very easily. And to be honest, we as a company, we also applied for a spectrum. It was not that big process like you can imagine from authorities. It was very pragmatic, and you have to have a planning, and then you put in the planning. The costs are not that costly. So this is really something which the government made right. But if you go to different countries, and if you want to have, if you are a city carrier, for example, and you want to serve a 5G network for smart city appliances, then you have a problem in Germany, because the 3.7 to 3.8 only can be in your area, in your fence, and where you can use these frequencies. And this is something different in Austria. This is different in some other areas. So at the end, the spectrum is a topic. The spectrum disharmonization is a topic. It's also a topic because of the availability of the radios. For example, if you talk about LTE or 5G, in LTE you have the 3.4 to 3.8 gigahertz spectrum, which is divided in 3 bands, band 42, band 43, band 48, which is, and they're all, and not every vendor is supporting these on the radio side as well on the handset side. Makes it easier in 5G. You have N78, so you have a wider spectrum. But these are the challenges which are really hindering us in going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned the spectrum disharmonization there. I think I opened this one up to the floor. I mean, what does that mean for enterprises who want to deploy private networks across multiple sites across the world? So is this hampering the market? And how do we move beyond the current situation? So I'm going to open that up to the floor.
Definitely, this is a difficulty for, like it was mentioned previously, the players that have factories or areas to cover in multiple countries are actually struggling now to develop a coherent strategy across those countries, and they even sometimes struggle to get the spectrum in the first place. So we mentioned UK, Germany, and the US are being quite easy country. if we take some other examples, or Japan as well, French, for instance, is a bit more cumbersome for players because you have to apply for a license that is covering at least 100 square kilometers, which is obviously not reflecting the size of the requirements of each and every customer there. So this is why sometimes, to facilitate the process, we see the development of players that, let's say, apply for licenses and are happy to split or to facilitate, I would say, the end customer accessing to the right spectrum to move forward.
I do want to add something in this space, since I know those enterprises that are actually looking at the global perspective to cover and harmonize the ecosystem. And those that have been in this journey for more than some time, and I think the ecosystem is coming together for that, to address it to a certain extent. By ecosystem means the integrators, the suppliers, the OEMs, but also the operators from different geographies are looking at, okay, how can we partner to address the demand and the market space? There are some partnerships established in the back end where they actually are looking at how they can address it and provide. In the end, it's about there is a need and there is a market. The customer wants to have the solution harmonized, and then the ecosystem is still working through the boundaries. Either it's Europe or even South Africa or even Latin America with American operators. So they're looking at how can we actually address it, because the customer who have taken the journey, who have decided that this is the path they want to adopt and go forward, they want to harmonize it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, you mentioned the MNO role there. I mean, perhaps one for you, Sylwia. I mean, what is the role for incumbent MNOs in the market? Is it a spectrum play, or do you see an opportunity for end-to-end services, or how do you see their position in private LTE and 5G market today?
Sure. So just to go back, and we mentioned the need for digital transformation and enterprises entering this journey. So we've been running enterprise and focus server where we serve 2,900 enterprises, and for the past 2 years, the demand for localized dedicated coverage, so private networks, is the same. So 22% of enterprises require this coverage, and out of these, around 90% would invest in those networks. So this gives you a bit of a flavor in terms of what is the actual demand in there. And then who they prefer to work with, number one is network vendors. So the likes of Nokia, Ericsson, ZTE, Huawei, and so on. And number two come operators, and then industry players, the likes of Bosch and Siemens and so on. So that's on the demand side, what enterprises actually want and who they work with. When it comes to operators, so MNOs, it's not only the incumbent MNOs. I think like any MNO can have a role to play in there. And they can take on multiple roles. So when you think, I think one of the first slides you showed, Steffen, was showing the multiple different ways that you can deploy a private network or non-public network, as 3GPP defines it. You can have, public network with a network slicing with a dedicated edge, or you can have actually, private network using operator spectrum, or you can have a co-investment, so partnership between enterprise and operator. So, these are the use cases for the hybrid networks when you have a private network, but you still need to be able to access public network. And we've seen quite a lot of this happening as well in Germany with T-Systems working with a number of players to enable that and so on. But when it comes to the role that operators can play is the solutions that need to be pre-integrated with the supporting infrastructure. That's very, very important. And the service management tools, billing systems, edge and cloud integration, that's very important, as well as the mechanisms for handling data authentication and security. And security is really key when it comes to private networks. And professional services, the natural fit for those operators that actually have a strong system integration consulting arm. We see the likes of Vodafone playing a very strong role in this as well. They have a very big arm there, so they can actually look at the system integration, managed services. And we did ask, we ran a survey of operators. We did ask them, what's the revenue expectations you have from 5G per networks, and they said they expect 40% of revenue to actually come from professional services. But reselling and deploying network infrastructure is also an important part of that. But what's really important, and I mentioned security, is actually 77% of operators applying to offer security as part of the private network offering. And it is a big opportunity for revenue generation for them in there. But when you think about, operators' role, multiple different layers, it depends on the country, as we mentioned, it depends on the regulatory environment there. It depends on, what's the historical position of the operator, what sort of what relationship they have with the existing enterprise clients. That's really, really important. So, there's going to be a mix, and there's no one size fit it all. But at the moment, again, when we ask operators what is that planning to do, they kind of put the eggs in the basket in the short term in the public networks with SLA. So they're trying to still figure out what is the best way for them to support the enterprise clients. And as we mentioned before, there's lots of collaboration, a lot of partnerships happening between, the network vendors, the cloud providers, the system integrators, and so on. So it's all about, making sure that it is all about business case, right? How can we help to deliver value?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Cédric, you with Transatel have a fairly, at least on the panel, a fairly unique position on the market. Is this something is this something you mirror, or do you have some alternative views?
No, I'm pretty much in line. What we see in the market is that the incumbent MNO, let's say now, as we mentioned, some of them are very strong consulting arm, and they are capable of developing every flavor of the private network. But historically, the MNO have been focusing more on the hybrid or even the virtual private network flavor of it, because they wanted first to capitalize on their assets, which is to use part of the public network in order to provide a solution, and this was the initial strategy. Now we see that has been evolving. That's for sure, especially for the large players. But however, we think that what is important for the end customer is to have a player that they can work with in order to do and to perform the end-to-end project from planning, design, installation, and operation is actually a key point there. And this is definitely too complex for the enterprise customer to perform this, so they need to find the right partners for that. And on top of some of the MNO, we do think that some specialized system integrators are also, let's say, a potential good partner. But foremost, the managed service providers, and we see more and more players that are trying to specialize on this in order to get a complete grasp of the potential private 5G, let's say, projects. Because what we have to say about private 5G is not only about providing and managing a network, is pretty much providing the capability for enterprise to have very clear business outcome. And for this, it's a complete story that has to be assembled from sensors, devices, gateways, up to analytics and applications. So definitely, we don't have to discard that all of those components, apart from the network itself, are also required to make a project a success for the customer.
Indeed. Okay. I'm just going to remind the audience that we are looking forward to your questions. So please remember to add them into the Q&A box, and we'll address those in a few minutes. But going back to the discussion, I think, that I mentioned there are some challenges in the market still today. I mean, do we see the market as mature? What are the main challenges for enterprises who want to get into private network deployments? And what are we doing in the ecosystem to address these challenges? Perhaps one for you, Fawad.
That's a good question. But I think I would go with saying iPhone 12 release for 5G has really set the bar very high in the ecosystem. So it's by having Apple releasing a product, and everyone thinks the 5G is already here, and I think what I'm seeing, the enterprises are still trying to understand, or they are exploring. Not everyone, but those that have understood, they understood what 3GPP is, what challenges are, how to navigate. I think Cédric and Christian and Sylwia brought up a few points about ecosystem partners, OEM, system integrator, managed services. So as Core Wireless has been providing IoT managed services, so we are actually looking into extending that in private networks. So enterprises really need to understand their use cases. They need to understand what they are going. This is a journey. This is not a Wi-Fi or a technology that they can just switch on and forget. This is a journey that they're looking to adopt, and the adoption of the journey comes into putting a roadmap, putting a target of how they will utilize and capitalize on their own investment, because this is going to change a lot for them. And as they add more use cases, as they add and redefine their own way of how they will operate by adding this technology, I see that this is a Lego block technology, so they have to actually put it in the right puzzle of Lego so it will actually work in harmonized fashion for them. So 5G, I think I do see there are a lot of challenges, some things that I believe Christian brought up, the chipset, the spectrum harmonization that is limiting the cost of the chipset. Even in 4G today, the cost of the chipset is too high to be really go into all manufacturing or ecosystem. The cost needs to come down, and the virtualization. So the first 4G network in US was deployed in 2010, and it's been more than a decade. The software virtualization, the SDN stack, that has enabled to today's world where we can actually deploy a network in a hybrid way where data can be broken out in 4G setup. But 5G is a long way to go. I have worked with you in the German side of it, where they have taken the journey on adopting 5G, but the use cases and the elements that they're looking to adopt, it's still expensive in terms of bringing the whole ecosystem together. So enterprises need to understand, they need to get into finding the right partners, finding the trusted partners that actually guide them through the challenging way. But I can assure, once they understand and they see the benefit of it, they will never look back. So.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned 5G there. I think that could be a really interesting space for private networks. I mean, not only in terms of millimeter wave, but also things like network slicing. How do you see that opportunity, Sylwia?
So I just want to clarify something when we talk about 5G, because 5G has multiple different flavors, so to speak, right? So we have the enhanced mobile broadband, which is really fast speeds, superior to LTE and Wi-Fi and so on. We also have the massive IoT, which is, high density, low power devices, and LTM and NB-IoT, the part of this journey as well. But when we talk about 5G at the moment, we're really talking about release 15, which is enhanced mobile broadband, which is faster speeds and so on. And at the moment, 5G standalone is just being deployed. And you really need 5G standalone to achieve some of the 5G IoT benefits. So this is all about ultra low reliable latency. Sorry, I can never pronounce it correctly. But what it actually brings is making sure that the new use cases can come on board. So you think about, machine learning that can really truly work. You think about AR, VR, augmented reality, but also robots that can really work without Wi-Fi and very quickly move around. But release 16 has been delayed because of COVID-19, and we only going to be able to see some of the chipsets released towards the end of this year. And it takes quite a while, so it takes about 3 hardware spins for any of the devices to come on board. So we're really truly going to see 5G IoT with all the benefits of the density, latency, just coming on board next year. So I just want to clarify that, because when we typically think about 5G, we only talk about think faster. It is not only about being faster. And the network slicing, the network slicing that we really truly look forward to, it is also going to be brought about by release 16. So network slicing brings the virtual network slicing. So you don't have you have a cheaper way to deploy it, And also you can get SLAs, quality of service, dedicated part of the network to what you need. But also edge computing comes in, and edge computing, I don't know, we'll have time to deploy to discuss it later on, but it is really key and brings quite a lot of really interesting use cases to the fore. And when we again ask operators what they're going to do in the 2-3 years time, they see more of the deployments moving towards supporting network slicing with the mobile edge computing, which is very, very important to bring it to keeping this compute on the edge, so not sending everything to the cloud. And data isolation and security is really key for private networks. Sorry, I'm took quite a while, but I just wanted to make clear that 5G IoT, what is 5G when you talk about private networks and then IoT?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm just going to pause the panel discussion there because we've got a couple of questions come in. So maybe let's address those initially. I think there's a really good one come in here that says, is mobile IoT something that SMEs can truly embrace, or is it really only something for larger companies with good technical knowledge and deep pockets? I'm going to open that up to the floor.
Well, it is exactly. It depends. So this is related to the answers what Sylwia and also Fawad says. Okay, it's a very complex thing. And you need slicing, and I think for the smaller companies, it's something which is very interesting, but they cannot do it on their own. That's clear, because they need help. They need help in integration. They need the costs. They have to afford the network. So our idea is, especially here in Germany, that there are some companies which are coming up now and which are helping the smaller companies to have a network and a shared network. For example, you have an industry area. They have 3, 4, 5 different companies. And 2 or 3 are interested in having a 5G network. Then they share this, and they can share it easily with slicing. And they have one completely operation. They can use their own slices. So this is something which can be very interesting, and which is now possible with 5G and with slicing.
Mm-hmm. I want to add and to echo what Christian was mentioning, and from the perspective, when it comes to the 4G part of the technology, I think this is much more feasible. This doesn't require deep pockets. The IoT elements and the ecosystem is fairly mature enough. But on the 5G, yes, I believe still require deeper pocket and technical know-how to navigate and identify, to arrive to the return of investment that they would achieve and can justify on going towards the 5G adoption.
Do you think things like networks as a service models will help SMEs get into the market? Is that something that's going to be broadly available as we move into the future?
I think you brought up the right point. I think this is what we're looking into right now, Core Wireless, to make democratization and access to the technology much more easier, both on the IoT space and the technology space. So I think the technology is there. The advancement has achieved to a certain extent that it needs to go. The mass scale adoption can only happen when it becomes more easier to adopt. And that's what Core Wireless is working on, and we intend to release soon. So.
And I would add to that obviously the hype in 5G and 5G is actually opening many doors and many possibilities for the future, but 4G is already there. And actually, it's already available, and we have deployed project with let's say autonomous shuttle with assembly line robots with 4G already. So the technology is already there and already serving purpose. So I think that's also something that's to be noted.
I just want to add before that it is really important, especially when you talk about SMEs and small companies, not to get caught up in the technology and discussion about technology, which is better, LTE, 5G, Wi-Fi, and whatever else. At the end of the day, enterprises don't care. They have a problem and they want a solution. That's what it is. So out of the box, easy to deploy, and also pre-integrated, because right now, cloud is very important. So being pre-integrated into cloud is super key. So make it easy, make it simple, and do not discuss the technology. Just discuss, this is the problem, this is how we're going to address it, and the best technology for it. And we see, as Nokia called it, 4.9G LTE, it is already ready to be upgraded to 5G when 5G comes along. They say LTE and the IoT, which is the part of massive IoT in the future, will be ready to be upgraded to the massive IoT release 16 when it comes ready. So deploy what it is right now. Don't worry too much about technology, because it is about solving problems at the end of the day.
Okay. We have another question come in. Which industry sectors do you see as presenting the best opportunities for private networks? Is this the same around the world, or have you seen different activity in terms of regions?
So I can talk about the Middle European region, or the European region, and we see the most activities out today in the logistics and in the production area. So these are the two main factors. All these others, like agricultural and stuff, this is something which is laying a little bit behind. We see some movements in healthcare as well, but more on the research topics, more on the research fundings, which is funded by the government. But I would say logistics, production, and healthcare, these are the three main branches which are now very active and interested in these areas.
And on the US side, I think it's the same on the element of the manufacturing, but I think on the now the education sector is looking quite heavily on the CBRS to utilize also to provide connectivity in specific areas that has not have connectivity before, or to extend to students to be able to continue get the education from home.
Mm-hmm.
I would add utilities to the list of verticals. Utilities also require networks in there.
Okay. Well, we have 3 minutes left. I think we can perhaps squeeze in one last question. It's from Martin. What role do you expect cloud players to take in private networks or network slicing? Anyone want to take that one?
Well, it's a good question. The question is, cloud players I would say then it's a clear area for the SMEs area. But on the other hand, the pure cloud player is not present in the area. And it is a little bit more than only a core service. It has to be, how do I plan this? How do I operate this? Are there any SLAs which I can do? So I'm really not sure about the traditional cloud players, but I think the cloud architecture for 5G. Yes, I think this is something which plays a role. But who is operating? I think these are more who are really concentrated, who know exactly how is the production and how can I access to the companies, and how can I integrate this. This is something which I see more. So not on Google or on Amazon or some other cloud players. Yeah.
I think from my perspective, what I see is all cloud players, either there are fewer that are leading in this space, but most of them and everyone will be offering same or similar type or advanced solutions in this space. But that will be, as Christian mentioned, limited to what cloud does offer in terms of the close proximity or edge computing elements to a certain extent. But when it comes to 4G, you can have a local network without even having anything in the cloud. On 5G, you can run the control plane to control various countries' locations in one cloud instance or various cloud instances. And cloud players are adopting their own infra to accommodate these type of use cases. And that's the important element, which from the SME point of view, that they are looking to adopt and enable it. And I think as the adoption goes further and further, it will come to an extent that they are playing good role. They're supporting and accelerating it by automating a lot of elements and bringing AI into place.
Great.
At the end of the day, it's ecosystem play. So there's going to be a number of partnerships, and we already see a lot of partnership between hyperscalers and in the Mac space, especially, and pre-integration. So nobody can do it alone. In IoT, as we know, it takes a village. So I think there's going to be multiple partnerships and collaboration just to ensure the market will mature and grow.
Absolutely. I think on that note, we are going to have to draw it to a close. It's just a shame. I think we could talk about this for many, many hours more, but it's a really interesting space. And yeah, I just want to thank you all, Sylwia, Christian, Fawad and Cédric, for your participation today. Really appreciated, and thank you for your insights today. I hope the audience enjoyed the panel and the presentation today. Yeah, just to close it out, thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.